Supply and demand. Price theory, the concept that prices don't just happen but are the result of considered formulation, is at the core of microeconomics. But you may ask, how are prices set? How do price, cost, and value all interact in this glorious economic universe of ours? Demand is the willingness and ability to buy goods and services at a set price at a specific time. Again, key distinctions: willingness and ability, set price, specific time. Willingness and ability are vital. I am very willing to buy my new Harley Davidson, but on my teacher's salary, I'll be lucky if I can afford a Vespa. So while I am willing to buy, I am not able to buy, so I do not work into this equation. Everything has a price, and price and value are not interchangeable concepts. If my new Harley has a price of $28,000, but is only worth $9,000 to me to get a new two-wheeler, the set price is too high. But when price and perceived value align, that is when I get loud pipes. Assuming, ceteris paribus, that I have the means and desire to buy my new Harley due to my unexpected Christmas bonus, the specific time kicks in. Now, I am unwilling to ride in the dead of winter, so I am able but unwilling to buy a Harley in January. However, come April, when a young man's fancy turns to thoughts of the open road, well, that's a whole nother story. So how do we determine demand? In the economist model, it is set by a demand schedule. This is a marginal listing of possible units purchased and prices paid. Now, marginal means one additional unit of goods or services. Think of it this way. I own a donut shop. It's called Torgnuts, and my donuts are good. What I need to know in order to figure out how to price my donuts is how many people are willing and able to buy donuts if they cost $4 each. How about $3.50? I work down in 25-cent increments and I get a rough estimation of people's willingness and ability to buy donuts at a set price at a specific time. What this does is it leads me to what's called a demand curve. The demand curve shows me how my donuts, the quantity of donuts on the bottom, will compare with the number of donuts, the price of donuts, up on the side. This brings us to the law of demand. The higher the price something is, the less demand there is for it. The lower the price there is, the greater the demand for it. Now, this is what's known as an inverse relationship. And an inverse relationship is not to be confused with a perverse relationship. Now, the demand curve should technically be a curve, but straight lines are easier to draw. So the question is, why is the demand curve a straight line? The answer, of course, is this is economics. Don't look for logic. There are a number of things that affect demand. First is the number of consumers. The more people out there demanding a scarce resources, the higher the demand for that item. Income. Can people afford to buy? Will their income change over time? Yours will, and mine already has. Personal tastes. What do people want? Remember when everybody wanted a Tickle Me Elmo? How many people are lining up outside of Toys R Us for it? Well, Toys R Us doesn't exist, but how many people are lining up to get a Tickle Me Elmo now? There are other things that affect demand, and it's the price of related goods. Now, this is the sticky part. I make donuts. My donuts are good. They're a little pricey, but they're worth it. Now, somebody decides to go into the cupcake business. You don't need my donuts. You can buy a cupcake. So you can substitute my donuts for a cupcake. If the perception is that a cupcake is a better deal than the donut, the demand for the donut will drop. So what I've got to do? Donut cupcakes. There are also complementary items. Now, right next door to my donut shop, there's going to be a new Dutch Bros. Since everybody loves to dunk donuts in coffee, demand will rise because of a rise in the demand for a complementary product. So now, you can shift the demand curve. Demand can change. In this instance, demand is changing for the better. More people are willing to buy donuts at a higher price. But demand can also shift the other way, leaving people less willing to buy donuts at the prices. Now, the aggregate demand curve is the total demand curves from all sources. Just because my donut shop is doing well, it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody's donut shop is doing well. In a wider micro sense, we need to pay attention to the competition as well. Back to business. Now, you can be willing to buy goods and services all you want, but if there's no one to sell it, your demand's going to go unmet. That's where the other half of the equation comes into play. Supply is the willingness and ability to sell goods and services at a set price at a specific time. Now, as my apprentice donut makers, you need to figure out what price you're willing to sell the donuts for. It costs about 10 cents to make a donut. So how many will you be willing to sell for a nickel, a dime, a quarter, half a buck, etc.? In this way, we use a similar thought process to come up with not only a supply curve, as well as a supply table. Now, the law of supply is the higher the price, the more willing you are to sell, and the lower the price, the less willing you are to sell. Similarly, the supply curve can shift just like the demand curve shifts. Some of the things that affect supply are technology. It used to be that a pocket calculator was made by a company called Texas Instruments. They weighed about 1.5 pounds and cost roughly $100. With the improvements in technology today, you can get a calculator that can do more than the old TI built into a wristwatch or sewn into the lining of a notebook. Input costs. In making the TI, not only did technology improve to make the manufacturing process more efficient, the cost of the things to make the actual calculator fell. So it cost less money to make, so we can make more product for the same amount of money, and then we pass the savings along to the consumer. Finally, there's price expectations. I know that I'm going to be able to sell these at a higher price, so I'm going to put that price and supply those at that price point. If I sell at a unreasonably low price, people's first reaction is going to be, what's wrong with it that you're selling it so inexpensively? So now let's pause for distinctions. We already know there's a difference between price, cost, and value, but let's dig a little deeper. Cost is what you have to give up in order to produce goods and services. It's what does it take to make a thing. Price is what you have to give up in order to obtain goods and services. What would it take for you to buy it? And then value is what you determine the worth of the goods and services to be. What would you sell that for? Back in '91, the Hallmark company decided to start selling Star Trek ornaments. The first one they sold was the Starship Enterprise. You press a button on the saucer section, and the lights lit up and Spock wished you happy holidays. It cost about $1.50 to make. At Hallmark, it was priced at $7.99, almost a 500% markup from the manufacturing price. These days, they're on the secondary market selling for almost $130. That's an 860% markup from the retail price. One of the things I'd like you to do is I'd like you to get used to drawing this shape. Price is on the top, quantity is on the bottom, demand slopes down, supply slopes up. When supply and demand meet, you reach equilibrium. This is where the willingness and ability to buy goods and services and the willingness and ability to sell goods and services meets. Meets in the middle, X marks the spot. Equilibrium does not, however, happen all the time because we are allocating scarce resources among competing and unlimited wants. Shortages. Oftentimes, the demand for something is higher than the supply of something. The PS5 at Christmas time 2020 there were a lot of people who wanted them, not a lot of people could get them. During the Rona outbreak, toilet paper, hand sanitizer, all of those things were in high demand, but the suppliers could not keep up with the demand. When the demand is higher than the quantity supplied at a specific price, you are going to get a shortage. During the Rona crisis, we also had other shortages because there were more wanted than were able to be supplied. On the other hand, when the demand for a thing is less than the available supply, you get a surplus. Back in 2008, there was no demand for a gas hog SUV when prices for gasoline were hovering around $4.50 a gallon. So you get what we have here. You get parking lots full of SUVs that were made, but that nobody's going to buy because nobody wants to spend $100 filling their SUV up. In Medford, there were dealerships that were reducing the prices of SUVs and big trucks by nearly half of their sticker price just to move them off of the lot. When you have more of a thing at a certain price than is demanded, you will get a surplus. So who decides? Well, it all depends on who you ask. In the 1700s, there was an economist named Adam Smith. Smith put forth the concept of the invisible hand that regulates the market. Smith said that the willingness to buy and the willingness to sell would be all it took to determine equilibrium prices of goods and services. There didn't need to be any intervention by any centralized organization in order for this to work. However, during the Great Depression, the invisible hand took a vacation. The global economy went into the dumpster and the United States suffered for it. Come the 1930s, an economist named John Maynard Keynes came up with the concept that government action needed to give the invisible hand direction. Now, we're going to get into Smith and Keynes later, but know that government often puts its finger in the economic pie, especially in the determination of price. When the government, and it's always the government, sets the price above equilibrium, they have established a price floor. This is the price below which goods and services cannot be bought, even though the invisible hand would set the price at lower than the price floor. Farmers are protected in this way by governments setting minimum prices for purchases of farm goods. This guarantees the farmer a predetermined income from the sale of those goods regardless of supply and demand. Price floors lead to surplus goods. On the other hand, when government decides that the price of something should be below the equilibrium of price, you get a shortage. Think of rent-controlled apartments. If you have a rent-controlled apartment, the market price of that apartment would rise a lot higher than what the rent control price would allow. So, when you have a price floor, you have a surplus. When you have a price ceiling, you have a shortage. Easiest way to remember this is to flip the house. The ceiling is on the bottom, the floor is on the top. Elasticity. Now, this is a bit of a heavy concept and it involves some math, so we're going to slow this one down considerably. Don't worry, we have a kitten. In supply and demand, we usually draw the curves as an X, mostly for convenience. But a lot of times the supply and demand curves are not at a perfect 90-degree angle. The willingness to buy and the willingness to sell can be changed by many factors. Elasticity is basically how supply affects demand, how demand affects supply, and a measure of responsiveness within the price structure. Now, there's a scary sounding term that you need to know, and it's price elasticity of demand. It also has something of a scary sounding definition combined with a scary looking formula, but basically it means that when there's a change in price, there's going to be a change in demand, which we already knew, and if you figure out what the percentage change in price is and set it side by side with the percentage change in demand, you can figure out whether an item has an elasticity of demand. So I sell donuts. I raise the price of my donuts 10%, so in this example, the percent change would be 10. And because of this, the sales of donuts dropped 15%, so the change in sales would be 15. The way that you can tell whether an item has price elasticity is whether, after you do the math, the number is greater than or less than the number 1. Now, because we are doing short division, at this particular point, we don't care about negative and positive. Elasticity of demand is when a change in price has a great effect over the quantity of demand. So, the elasticity of demand, the change in quantity demanded divided by the change in price. I changed my price on the bottom 10%, and my sales, the demand, dropped 15%. So I find that after I do the math, my number is greater than 1. That means that this product is elastic. Donuts are very responsive to changes in price. They're a luxury item. The demand curve for luxury items, for elastic items, would be more flat. The greater the flatness, the greater the elasticity of an item. So when you see that there's a very small increase in price and a very substantial decrease in quantity demanded, you'll know that that item is a very elastic item. These are luxury items, cruises and cars and stuff like that. Now, it can work the other way too. If I lower my prices a little bit, I can predict that I'm going to sell a whole lot more product. Inelasticity of demand is when the change in price has little or no effect on the quantity demanded. Now, I sell salt because I know that people need salt, and salt's one of those things that's a main ingredient in cooking and in seasoning. I figure I can make a little extra profit, so I'm going to raise the price of my salt by 10%. People see the increase in price, grumble about the economy, blame Rona, and then they buy the salt anyway. So I see that only 3% of the people who used to buy my salt are now not buying my salt. So, again, what's the percentage change in price and what's the percentage change in quantity demanded? The price elasticity for this item, after I do the math, is less than 1. That means that this item is inelastic. People will be nearly as willing to buy this good or service at a higher price as they will be willing to buy it at a lower price. The demand curve is also going to be more vertical. The greater the vertical, the lower the elasticity of an item. If there's a substantial price increase, there's going to be a minimum quantity decrease. Again, this can work in the opposite direction. Here are some examples of elastic and inelastic goods. You'll see that the goods on the top that are elastic are, for the most part, luxury items. The examples of inelastic goods are, for the most part, necessities. Now, it could be argued that cigarettes are not a necessity, but you try telling a smoker that. Some of the things that affect elasticity of demand versus inelasticity of demand are available substitutes. Can I get Coke rather than Pepsi? Cupcakes rather than donuts? What's the percentage of budget involved? Is it an increase in pennies or is it an increase in dollars? And the time. What's my time frame to learn about this product, avoid impulse buying? Brand loyalty. I'm going to buy this brand because I've always bought this brand. I don't care if they raise their prices. Income elasticity of demand. As a person's income changes, their buying habits will change as well. People often live to their means. So income elasticity of demand, or YED, is the responsiveness of demand to a product when a consumer's income changes. Now, if the product is considered a luxury item, donuts, eating out, cruise ships, then people can afford to do it, they will. But if they can't, they probably will not buy the item, or they might buy the item on the credit card. We use Y for income. Why? Because I stands for interest. Again, this is economics, don't look for logic. The formula for income elasticity of demand is the percent change in quantity demanded divided by the percent change of income. Again, we're looking at whether the number after the math is going to be greater than or less than 0, and how much it's going to be. So this time, we're going to be looking at negative numbers. We're also going to be looking at what kind of good it is, normal, inferior, luxury good, or if the YED is 0. So a normal good is where increased income leads to a higher demand. These are the things that, yeah, it'd be nice to get that, so I'm going to buy this. I'm going to buy another one of these because I can afford to buy another one of these. So if the YED is between 0 and 1, that's a normal good. And increased income is going to lead to higher demand. If the YED is greater than 1, those are luxury goods. This is going to be a bigger percent increase in demand. These are things that you otherwise wouldn't do. I'm going to take my sweet and beautiful wife to Hawaii. I'm going to buy out some more amateur radio equipment for my ham shack. I'm going to get a newer, bigger, better sports car. If the YED is less than 0, if it's a negative number, then increased income is going to lead to a fall in substitute items or inferior goods. Why would I buy, Folgers crystals when I can buy Starbucks? I'm not going to buy Blue Bunny, I'm going to buy Haagen-Dazs. If the YED is 0, if it's an essential good, then income has no effect on demand. Cross elasticity of demand. This is the last elasticity that we are going to talk about, so don't freak out. This is where the markets for complementary and substitute goods come into play. Cross elasticity is the quantity demanded of the other product divided by the price of the original product. Now, I did say that there were going to be complementary and substitute items. So we're going to take a look at a real-life example of complementary and substitute items. On Highway 99, there's a car wash that was built right next door to an O'Reilly's auto parts store. Now, people who go to an auto parts store are usually most likely people who are going to take care of their cars more often than the average bear. So when they're done buying car stuff, they're going to want a clean ride. So car wash. These are complementary items. You can go to O'Reilly's, you can go to the car wash. Both are car things that are going to benefit. So those are complementary items. With a complementary item, the demand for one, or the price of the complementary item, can affect the demand for the original item. Again, ceteris paribus, we've got the CP ferry up there. If O'Reilly decides to lower their prices, the demand at the car wash is going to go down because people are going to be more willing to go to O'Reilly's and they're going to be more willing to stop at the car wash. Cookie Monster taught us that. So now, originally, there was a Napa Auto Parts store across the street. And as you can see, it was an old cinder block building from the 1950s. It's a little old ratty shack. But across the street, literally across the street from the Napa Auto Parts, O'Reilly built their store. Before O'Reilly's showed up, if they didn't want to go to Napa, they would have to go out of town. They would have to go into Medford or up to Grants Pass in order to get auto parts. So now there's a choice. There's a substitute item. You can either go to Napa or go to O'Reilly's. They're interchangeable. Coke and Pepsi, if there is a change in the price of one, there's going to be a change in the other direction for the demand of the other. So if Coke raises their price, demand for Pepsi is going to increase. If Coke lowers their price, people are going to go over to Coca-Cola. Cross elasticity of demand is the demand for the other product divided by the price of the initial product. Keep that in mind, because cross-price elasticity, if the cross-price elasticity, if the YED is greater than 0, then they're substitute items. Burger King versus McDonald's, Home Depot versus Lowe's. You can one or the other, Ford versus Chevy. If the YED is less than 0, then those items are complements. Pizza and beer, PB&J. Donuts and coffee. If the YED is 0, then the two goods are independent of each other. Orange juice and toothpaste. Unit elastic is there because basically it rounds out the Punnett square. This is where, after you do the math, it equals exactly 1. So if I raise my price 10%, demand is going to go down 10%. If the price of the original item goes up 10%, then the demand for the other item is going to go down 10%. If the substitute item goes up, then the original item is going to go down. It's 1-to-1 ratio.